Hi, everyone. I'm John Dominguez. I'm a clinical psychologist with Meridian Psychiatric Partners. If you haven't seen the three videos in the series prior to this, you're looking at number 4, which we'll be talking about today, Interpersonal Conflict Resolution Made Easy. This is the 4th in the video series on general psychological wellness. The first 3, if you hadn't seen them, the first was on preventative mental health. The second, I presented a model for personal growth, and the third, a model for social problem solving. Not my model, but I'm talking about a model that I've chosen and talk about how to use that. So if you're interested in any one of those 3 and you haven't seen them, if you're checking into this number 4 and you haven't seen either one of the 3, you might not be completely bored to check them out. So just so you know what was presented in the first 3 if you missed. So for today, in the Interpersonal Conflict Resolution Made Easy, the 4th video, the first thing that I want to talk about is listening and perspective taking. I always say to my clients and friends and anybody who wants to listen that listening and perspective taking are by far your best 1-2 punch to prevent a disagreement from becoming an argument. And there are always 2 things that you want to keep in mind if you're having any kind of conversation that you care about, especially if it's one that's conflictual in any way. It's an argument, it's a disagreement, or something even more, intense than that. Appropriate listening and perspective taking can diffuse a lot of tension in a conversation. I'm going to talk about how that works and what that looks like. The first thing about listening, we all know what that means, but attending with integrity is something important, but that's also kind of different. We've all probably been on both ends of someone who's listening, but only half-heartedly. They might not be on their phone or talking over you or looking completely in the other direction, but sometimes you just get the feeling when you're talking to someone that their head is somewhere else, and they just definitely rather be doing something else. And maybe sometimes we're on the listening end of that, and we're giving that vibe off, or we're thinking that. Those things happen, but that's not what I would call attending with integrity. Attending with integrity is something that I think is an important component, especially for important conversations. So definitely keep that in mind. And perspective taking, I don't have to tell you what that means, but really trying to see perspectives from someone else's vantage point. And always understanding that you might be locked in on your interpretation of what's going on in a certain scenario, but always keeping in mind that you can have your opinion and your perspective, but always have to respect that there are others that are equally as valid, at least. So always keeping that in mind. And then the last 2 things that I want to phrase and I want to emphasize, in this slide are reflective listening and validating. I probably could have done an entire video on these 2 things, but my guess is that most of this audience kind of already knows this stuff, so I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, but I want to review it quickly, but also hopefully meaningfully, so that we have this foundation going forward when we're talking about the next 2 models that I'm going to present. So reflective listening isn't just attending with integrity. It requires attending with integrity, but it's more than that. It's being able to listen so well that you're able to rephrase the message that you're hearing to the other person in your own words, hopefully representing what their core message is. And when you reflect that back, I want you to use what's I called an interrogative tone. That just means your inflection should sound like a question, not like a statement. Like, sounds like you're angry with your child, but you don't want to discipline them. See how that tone was more like a question? That invites the speaker to be able to say, well, not exactly. It's kind of like that, but it's more like this. Or they can say, exactly. That's exactly right. So then you can go from there. Because if you've missed on the reflection and they let you know, you can let them say more, or you can try again. But again, if you use that questioning tone, it invites them to to let you know that that's not exactly right, and then you can spend the time making sure you get the right message, because that's going to be important for the conversation to move on, obviously. Again, I could say more about that, but I'm going to stop there, and hopefully in some of my examples going forward, you'll see it played out. And then acknowledging and validating someone else's feelings when you're having a conversation. And that's just exactly what it says. It's like letting you know that you heard somebody say how they're feeling, or that you're understanding how they're feeling by how they're talking and their nonverbals, and you're acknowledging that and validating those feelings. Validating feelings, again, most of you know this, if not all, but it's just making sure that um, not only do they feel understood, but they feel like their feelings are being valued, um, by by the listener, by you, if you're the listener. And just an easy example is, if my wife, for example, or if anyone's wife went to their, or any spouse goes to their spouse and says, I just been feeling like we haven't been spending a whole lot of time together. It's one thing to be validating and say, oh, okay. So it's like you're kind of wanting to spend more time with me, but it hasn't felt like we've been prioritizing that and making that happen. That's a validation. It's in a questioning tone, but I could also respond in a way that isn't like completely cruel, and actually kind of nice, but also invalidating, and it doesn't feel good. If my spouse says, I just feel like we haven't been spending as much time together. I wonder if I wonder, and I'm not feeling comfortable about that. And if I say, oh, sweetie, we just hung out 2 nights ago. On the Saturday, we went over to the Johnsons, and I had to eat their really bad casserole. And then didn't the week before that, didn't we go to that movie that you wanted to see? I'm not being a jerk. I'm not saying anything mean or inaccurate, but that's an example of a complete invalidation of the feeling of I miss I miss our time together. And I wasn't able to validate those feelings because I didn't really reflectively listen. I probably wasn't intending with integrity either. So real quick examples of what a validating versus invalidating response could look like, and let's see if we can get into some others. So the next two things that I'm going to present are two models, and this won't take very long. This will be a fairly short video. But when I teach this, I developed these models to teach it to teenagers. So let me just say that. Since then, I've talked to colleagues about it, and there's a lot of value in this, for adults and adult problems too. But these are the models that I use to teach middle school kids. And what I like middle and high school kids, what I like about these models, and the kids don't seem to appreciate it, because the kids sometimes think, well, that you just made it oversimplified, and I don't want you to write. I shouldn't have to be given a script, and that's totally not what any of these things are about. But because I broke it down so simply, sometimes people feel like patronized to like learn it this way. So that's usually one of the first things I have to go through with some students when I present these models. But what I tell them, what I want everyone to know, is what I love about these two models I'm going to present is they were born out of an actual group therapy process. So real students and real colleagues, real therapists, real teachers, real students came up with this model. Now, of course, I had a really good idea of the components that I wanted to put in such a model, but I really put it out to the group of staff and students. And I said, okay, all right, when somebody, we all hate when when people give us corrective feedback, right? Nobody really loves people telling us what we're doing wrong. Now, there some people are really evolved and appreciate the kind of feedback that can help them be a better person. I'd like to think that I'm one of those people. But if people do it in a way that's condescending or overly critical or judgmental or mean, it sure as heck doesn't feel good. So I wanted to come up with a model of how could you give somebody corrective feedback in a way that would minimize defensiveness and improve collaboration and respect and all those things, and promote all those great values that we want to have in a conversation. So I opened it up to the group of staff and students, and I said, okay, we've all been given corrective feedback. Can anybody think of a time where they were given corrective feedback and it actually didn't feel bad? They didn't get angry, they didn't get defensive. And what was funny is very few people could come up with an example. So I said, well, okay, hypothetically, if somebody was going to let you know that you did or said something that made them upset or uncomfortable or angry or offended, what would be the easiest way for you to be able to hear that? Okay. And, that's when a couple of hands started popping up and saying things like, well, I'd want them to know that I didn't mean it. I'd want them to know what I was trying to do or say, because I probably didn't mean to hurt them. And I'm like, great, perfect. Okay. I like that. I think that's important too. So they need to be able to at least try to take your perspective on this. Okay. Try to understand where you're coming from, or what your intentions might have been, and not make assumptions about that. We're all like, yeah, we all kind of agree that, yeah, that's an important one. That's probably right there at the top. That should probably start this. It should probably start this, because if somebody came into that discussion and went straight to the punch, again, that might catch you off guard. That might knock you back a little bit. That might feel a little off-putting, and that could impact the rest of the conversation. So we kind of all agree that the first step is going to be perspective taking. And then I asked, okay, what else? Okay, you want them to take your perspective, and what else? And then I got a lot of comments about, well, I don't want them to blame me, and I don't want them to assume things, assume what I was trying to do, or draw conclusions about how I feel about them, or how I think my opinion's always right. Like, I don't want any of that. Okay, and that made sense. A lot of people said something like that, which I expected. So I'm like, okay, so it's going to be very important that we don't make any subjective editorial comments. Let's keep it really specific, and let's keep it really objective. Okay. So we want them to take a perspective taking approach, and then we want them to be really specific about the corrective feedback that they want to give us. And the first thing we said was important was, I want to know their specific feeling. Okay. Specifically, did they feel angry? Did they feel frustrated? Did they feel disappointed? Did they feel belittled with whatever it was I did? I want to understand their specific feeling. I don't want it to be like a vague thing like, why do you always do this? Or you always say mean things. Want it to be real specific. Okay. And I also need to know exactly what it was that I did wrong. Sometimes people say, you're always, like I said, you're always being so mean. You're always being so selfish. Those are pretty general, vague comments. It's going to be helpful to the person hearing the feedback to have something specific to hold on to. So we, just fast forwarding this through this conversation, we said, okay, so being specific about your behavior that impacted them and how they felt about it, those are going to be two important things, and those should be the next two steps. Okay, got it. And they don't need to be in any order, by the way. I'll talk about for a second at the end too. Want to start with a perspective taking comment, and then we want to be specific about our feelings about their behavior. Okay, fair enough. And then what else? How should it? That's a good start. But how should we kind of wrap this up? And after some discussion, we all thought that it would be a good way to end that discussion would be kind of on a positive note. So maybe like if they had a suggestion for what I could do differently, so I didn't impact them in the same way, that wouldn't feel bad. That would be something that I could take away and use. And we kind of all agree that, okay, this is a really good model. Maybe it's not perfect. I don't know anyone better, to be honest, but it may not be perfect, but this is a really strong model in terms of meeting our goals of minimizing defensive-ness and increasing collaborative problem solving. At least I believe that, and this is how it's played out for me, personally and professionally. So that's let me say more about each of the 4 steps, but that's the general feedback model. And what I tell when I teach this to students, I start by saying, this sounds like an overstatement, but I don't think it's that much of an overstatement. There really are only 2 kinds of interpersonal problems. One is someone did something that made you feel some kind of negative way. And then there's another scenario where you made someone else or some other group of people feel a negative or uncomfortable kind of way. Okay, so these models address both of those, each of those, I should say. The feedback model addresses a situation where you need to let someone know how they've negatively impacted you. And what I'm going to present at the back end of this video, the relationship repair model, is addresses a scenario where you've been made aware that you've done something that has made someone else feel not okay. And so where these two models address those two issues. And I do believe that those kind of cover, most of the whole continuum of, interpersonal problems. Um, at least that's what I tell them. And I do believe that. All right. So with the feedback model, we talked about perspective taking again, just acknowledging their point of view. The example that I use a lot when I teach this, I was trying to come up with a good therapist student type of problem. And one that I used for training is, a scenario in where the therapist tells the student, or the therapist and the student, they have a standing therapy time on Tuesday, fourth period, let's say, and it's Tuesday, fourth period, and whether the student loves the therapist or not, they still expect that during fourth period on Tuesdays, I get to get out of history and I get to sit and talk with my therapist, and that might even be fun. It might even be helpful. And on this particular week, let's say that the student told the therapist, okay, I got a lot to tell you tomorrow on Tuesday. Say it's Monday, I got a lot to tell you during our session. I'm excited for us to meet. Therapist's like, yeah, very, me too. And let's say in this hypothetical scenario that Tuesday, fourth period comes around and the therapist didn't show. Okay. For whatever reason, therapist doesn't show. So um, when I use this example and I ask the student to, okay, this is a scenario where you might want to give the therapist some feedback. How would you do that using the feedback model? Perspective taking, specific behavior, specific feeling about their specific behavior, and a suggestion for future problem solving. So an example of a perspective taking comment, and then I'll quickly go through the other three. In this scenario, is the student saying something like, hey, Dominguez, I'm totally aware that you have a really, really busy schedule and a lot of people on your case. That is a more than adequate perspective taking comment to start this process. It's not an attack. It doesn't make an inference. It gives me, the offender in this situation, the benefit of the doubt. Like I'm not feeling like I'm being accused of doing something mean on purpose. So this student has got my attention. And even though they're about to tell me something corrective, they've opened this conversation in a way that I'm completely all ears, and I feel like kind of like connected to this in a meaningful way. Okay, so that's a good perspective taking comment in this scenario, just acknowledging that there might be reasons why I couldn't keep the appointment. And then shifting into the specific behavior and the specific feeling. Now, I can't stress this enough. And again, most of you know this, and those of you who don't, please don't forget it. When you're transitioning into from a perspective taking comment to a more corrective part of the conversation where you're talking about a negative feeling that they made you feel, or or their behavior that didn't land on you very well, it's imperative that we don't use the word but. It's a real easy trap to fall into, because in this scenario, yes, I mean, any one of these scenarios, but it's really easy to say, hey, Dominguez, I know you have a really busy schedule and a lot of people on your caseload, but you missed our you missed our time. Okay. The word but in this scenario and in most scenarios, think of it as like a delete button, but that doesn't just delete a character, it deletes your entire message that preceded the word but. So when students practice this, and adults too, when they practice this model, it's an easy trap to fall into, to give your perspective taking comment and then say, but I felt. So do not do that. Your substitution is and because both can be true. Because I can be a really busy therapist, and I can mess up and then miss a meeting and not let the student know. Okay, both of those things can be true. We don't need the word but. We don't want the word but to erase the entire message, the entire perspective taking comment. So I have to stress that. Okay, so student moves into the specific behavior, my specific behavior and their specific feeling. Again, order doesn't matter. So the student can say, Dominguez, I know you're really busy. You have a lot of students on your caseload. And I was really, really disappointed that you never showed up to pick me up during history earlier today when that was our scheduled time. So you heard the feeling, disappointed, and the specific behavior was not showing up to pick me up as scheduled. Okay. Another thing I like about this model is it goes really fast. These aren't long conversations. So far, we're 3 of the 4 steps in, and it's lasted about 11 seconds so far when you put it all together. Okay, so that's a really good example of this. I know how busy you are. I just felt, I felt really disappointed. See, I said but, and I felt really disappointed when you didn't show up. I was really looking forward to telling you what happened to me over the weekend. Okay, so we're 3 steps in. Good perspective taking comment. They were very specific about their feelings about my behavior. And again, it doesn't matter. They could have said, when you didn't show up to pick me up, 4th period, I felt really disappointed, or I felt really disappointed when you didn't show up 4th period. You see how the order doesn't matter here, but they should go back to back, and they should go after the perspective taking comment and right before the next step, which is the suggestion for future problem solving. So in this case, it could be, the next time, if you can't prioritize, our Tuesday 4th period, can you at least let me know that you're not going to make it, and then we can come up with a substitute time to reschedule before, then I can know that going in, so I don't, wait by the door 4th period. So let's put that all together. And you guys can time me if you want. I joked around and said we're like 12 seconds in. But if the student said to me, Dominguez, I know you're really busy and you have a lot of kids on your caseload. And I was just really disappointed earlier today, 4th period, our scheduled time where you're supposed to show up to pick me up and you didn't. Next time we have a meeting scheduled, if you can't prioritize that time, which I hope that you could, but even if you couldn't, could you just let me know, and then we can reschedule a time? Does that sound okay? Okay, maybe that's like 20 seconds. I don't know if anyone was timing, but you get the point. This doesn't have to be a really long conversation. Okay, and what I like about this, when you put that all together, I don't care how bad of a person and how bad of a therapist I am in this scenario, it's gonna be really hard for me to argue that, to come back, to like push back against how this student just did that. They didn't make any judgments, inferences, accusations. It was all very objective. It was respectful. It was clear. It was specific. I got nothing if I wanted to like push back and say, but I'm so important and I'm so big. Like that was already acknowledged by the guy. I have nothing. I have no defensive comments to say, and that's why we like it. If this is done well, the other person is disarmed from any kind of defensive response, which is going to make this whole discussion be less effective. Okay, so in a perfect world, this doesn't always have to happen. You can use the feedback. The feedback model can happen at any time in isolation. So can the relationship repair model. But in an ideal conversation, the feedback model discussion would precede a relationship repair discussion. And that's what I'm going to portray here. That's what I'm going to illustrate here. Okay. So same scenario, same characters, but now it's the other half of that problem that I said. It's not someone did something to you and you need to give the feedback. Now it's you did something to someone else and you need to make it right. Okay, so same exact scenario, same exact characters, but now I, as a therapist, I'm gonna facilitate, the relationship repair discussion based on this exact same scenario. Okay, so student comes up to me, and hopefully I'm decent enough person where I heard it, couldn't get defensive, appreciated their transparency and honesty, and if I'm human, I should be feeling a little bit of guilt right now. Okay, we don't all love guilt and shame, but we should be sitting there with something that says, I don't feel good disappointing this person, and I don't want this to happen again. That there should be that little bit of that feeling in my stomach. Okay, I would hope that there would be, and I believe there would be. I know there would be. Okay, so the relationship repair model, it was born in the same way, through a real discussion with real students and real staff members and real therapists and real teachers about, okay, when we have forgiven someone, forgiveness is a very, very good thing, but sometimes it's really hard to do. But when we have forgiven someone and haven't regretted that and felt good about forgiving someone, we let someone off the hook, we buried the hatchet, we let go of the grudge. What did they do to make us feel comfortable doing that? How did somebody repair the relationship successfully after making you feel uncomfortable or you're sad, or however they made you feel, angry, offended? Like, how did they make it right? What did they do? Let's break down the steps. And this one was easy. Everyone said they need to apologize. Okay, so sincere apology, that's a good spot for it, right at the top. You see the word sincere, I'm not going to leave that one out, because we've all listened to, hopefully not given a whole lot, but probably given some. We know what an insincere apology sounds like. I'm sorry, my God, okay? Sorry, okay? We just move on. Okay. There's a million different versions of that. That was an extreme one, but we probably heard those too. So a sincere apology not only acknowledges what you said or did, but um, it also acknowledges sort of the impact of your verbalization or your behavior in a way that really shows that you understand. Okay, let me get into that in a second. Um, so it starts with a sincere apology, and then what? Then the next thing, like, okay, so then what? Then what? They can't just say sorry and leave. Like, what else did they do to help repair the relationship? And people started talking like, well, they at least let me know what was going on with them. Okay. And someone's like, no, that's just an excuse. No, they did it in a way that wasn't an excuse. So that was a big one for us. Okay, so they let you know, they kind of explained their situation, but they didn't use it as an excuse. Right, right. So because I just needed to know why they did what they did or said what they did. And I wanted to make sure they said that without like excusing their behavior. So that's what we said. Okay, step two then is some kind of explanation, reflection. I like the word reflection better here, but it's a reflection. It's an explanation based on a reflection, actually, and it demonstrates to the person, I gave some thought to what I did or what I said that made you feel offended. And here's what I think. Here's what I came up with. So the reflection helps to explain to the other person why they maybe have allowed themselves to do or say the thing that made you upset. Okay, and a good reflection explanation can set up the third step, which is a commitment. Okay, you did something that harmed someone in some way. You thought about it. You reflected on it. You think you figured out how that came to be, and now you can commit to not let that happen again. Okay, so that's why that leads right up to the step three, the commitment, and then step four. Obviously, no commitment is worth anything unless you're able to follow through on it. So as you can see in the relationship repair part of the discussion, there's only 3 steps in the discussion, because step 4 happens after the conversation. It happens in the days and weeks after. And again, that's the most important piece, because you can give a sincere apology and a great reflection and come up with a meaningful commitment. If you don't follow through on it, steps 1 through 3 mean nothing. And I think you can understand what that means. Okay, so that's the model. Again, born in the same type of conversation with real people. And so let's jump into that in this particular scenario. So in this case, I, as a therapist, owe this student a sincere apology. Okay, so I'm going to say, oh my gosh, you are so right. Today, 4th period, I was supposed to pick you up and I didn't. I am so sorry. I mean, you're there, you're in history. You mentioned that you really wanted to talk to me today. You're probably looking at the door, looking at the clock, and I never came. You must have felt really dismissed and forgotten about. Again, I am so sorry. So there's a sincere apology. There's that acknowledgement on, gosh, this must have made you feel this way. Okay. So you get that part. And then now I'm moving into my reflection explanation. You're right, I am busy, but that doesn't excuse anything. I think I think what happened is I got caught up in a couple things and lost track of time and didn't prioritize my schedule, which you were on and I value, but I didn't value it today. I let that slip. I let other things get in the way. Okay. That hopefully didn't sound like an excuse, but hopefully it sounded like I've thought about this and I reflected on it, and here's my explanation. And I like this one because it leads directly to the commitment, which it's supposed to do. I promise I'm going to work my butt off to prioritize all of our sessions from here on out. And I also make another promise. If I have to miss the Tuesday fourth period time because something comes up, I will let you know as soon as I know so that we can come up with a rescheduled time. And you'll be the first person I talk to you about that. And I'm going to make that commitment. Okay. So you see how this goes. Again, most of you guys, this is not rocket science or anything new, but I think it's worth reviewing some of the major principles with this. And sincerity with apologies. We take that for granted sometimes. People don't always do that. Okay. Avoiding making excuses. People don't always do that. And making commitments and following through on commitments. I know people in really, really, really healthy relationships that where something happens and someone does a pretty good relationship repair job, and then 3 days later, they make the same kind of mistake. They take their frustration out on someone they care about when they had said, the last time they had this conversation, yeah, I was really frustrated, but I know I can't take that out on you. The next time I get really frustrated, I'll make sure that I don't kind of take it, throw that your way. And then it happens again. So these things are worth repeating, because following through on the commitments that you make, that's where this leads to relationship strengthening versus the opposite. Because if you find yourself in a relationship, friendship or otherwise, where people are making commitments and they seem to be sincere and they're consistently not following through, it's going to be really hard for that to be a strong, reliable, healthy relationship. And it may be one that you need to cut out of your life if things can improve. Okay, so thank you for tuning into this fourth video. I hope you found it somewhat helpful. The next one that is going to be dropped is going to be establishing a healthy relationship with our emotions. So I hope you'll be compelled to tune into that, because I really do like talking into computers. So if you want to listen, I'll keep shouting at the screen. All right. Thank you guys very much.